Tonight marks 1 month since 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie, the mother of Today Show co-host Savannah Guthrie, disappeared from her Catalina Foothills home.
Day 18. And if you thought this case couldn't get more confusing, buckle up. Because the deeper we go, the more this story stops behaving like a normal investigation and starts feeling off. Contradictions stacking on contradictions. Statements shifting just enough to make you pause. Evidence that seems to pull forward one moment, then slide backward the next. One day, everyone is a suspect. The next day, no one is. Then suddenly, no one ever was. That kind of back and forth doesn't happen by accident. Add to that unexplained evidence, delayed DNA answers, missing clarity, and now a turn toward advanced genetic genealogy, something that takes time, pressure, and patience. And through it all, silence where answers should be. What's happening here isn't just about what we know, it's about what isn't being said, and why. Because when an investigation starts changing its language, its focus, and its tone, that usually means something behind the scenes has shifted. Pressure, strategy, or fear. Today isn't about rumors or wild theories, it's about patterns, behavior, and the moment when a case quietly moves from search to something else entirely. And once that happens, there's no going back. Day 18 didn't feel like progress. It felt like pressure. The kind of pressure you feel when a story refuses to settle into logic, when every new update adds friction instead of clarity. On the surface, it looked like movement. Statements were being made, evidence was being discussed, new forensic tools were being mentioned. But beneath that, something was shifting in a way that didn't quite sit right. Because investigations don't usually change their language this often. First, law enforcement said no one was ruled out as a suspect. Then, almost immediately, the family was ruled out. Then, just as quickly, the wording changed again. No one had been identified as a suspect. Those are not the same statements. And in a case like this, words matter. When officials begin tightening or loosening language in real time, it usually means one of two things. Either new information has surfaced, or outside pressure has entered the room. Sometimes both. What made this even more unsettling was how early some actions were taken. Actions that didn't align with the later statements. Vehicles were seized. Family movements were documented. Surveillance was heavy. Cameras were present. That level of scrutiny doesn't match a narrative where the family was never truly considered. So which version was real? The contradiction didn't exist in isolation. It stacked on top of other unresolved elements. Unclear timelines. Items found but not fully explained. DNA that didn't immediately lead anywhere. Gloves that raised more questions than they answered. Each piece alone might have been brushed aside. Together, they formed a pattern. And patterns are where investigations either break open or lock down. One of the most telling moments came when officials acknowledged that DNA evidence would now be processed through investigative genetic genealogy. That's not a casual step. It's not fast. And it's not used unless traditional methods have stalled. IgG is what you turn to when you don't know who you're looking for anymore. That admission alone reframed the entire case. Because if investigators were confident about direction, they wouldn't need to widen the net this way. This wasn't about confirmation, it was about discovery, about finding someone who wasn't yet clearly in focus. At the same time, the federal response, or lack of one, added another layer of ambiguity. When asked directly, federal agencies declined to comment. Not denial, not confirmation, silence. And silence in these cases is rarely empty. It often signals jurisdictional tension, internal disagreement, or an ongoing strategy that can't yet be acknowledged publicly. None of those possibilities bring comfort to the families involved, or to the public trying to understand what's happening. The more the case evolved, the less it resembled a straightforward disappearance. It didn't feel random, it didn't feel impulsive, and it didn't feel clean. Something about the sequence suggested intent, planning, control. Even the way information was released felt managed, paced just enough to acknowledge concern without revealing momentum. When that happens, it usually means investigators believe someone is watching, not following casually, watching closely. Cases that draw this kind of attention tend to reach a point where law enforcement must balance truth with timing. Say too much, and you tip off the wrong person. Say too little, and public trust erodes. That tension was becoming visible. Meanwhile, the focus slowly shifted away from the original location. The house that had once been treated as central began to feel exhausted, like it had already given up what it could. Investigative attention didn't disappear, it relocated. That's often the moment when a case quietly changes phase, from searching for answers to tracking movement. Movement matters, because crimes like this don't exist in one place. They travel, through vehicles, through people, through decisions made under pressure. When the trail goes cold in one location, it doesn't mean the trail is gone. It means it's elsewhere. And that realization reframes everything that came before it. The early contradictions, the sudden changes in language, the widening forensic scope. They stop looking like confusion and start looking like containment. Another element that couldn't be ignored was the psychological side of this case. Whoever is responsible didn't behave recklessly. There was no immediate confession, no dramatic collapse, no obvious mistake that blew everything open in the first days. Instead, what we see is patience. That kind of patience suggests confidence, or experience, or both. It also suggests more than one person. Cases involving a single panicked individual tend to unravel quickly. Someone talks, someone slips, someone leaves a trail too obvious to ignore. That hasn't happened here. And the longer that holds, the more likely it becomes that this was coordinated, not chaotic, not emotional, strategic. That doesn't mean everyone involved played the same role. It means roles existed at all. Planners, facilitators, observers, and possibly someone who believed they were untouchable. As the days passed, another uncomfortable question began surfacing. Not loudly, but persistently. Does someone already know more than they're saying? In many investigations, the truth isn't uncovered all at once. It leaks, slowly, through behavior, through hesitation, through statements that sound rehearsed rather than spontaneous. When people know more than they admit, their language tightens, their timelines simplify, their certainty becomes too polished, and investigators notice. By day 18, the case no longer felt like a mystery waiting to be solved. It felt like a truth waiting to be acknowledged. The kind of truth that doesn't surface until enough pressure builds, until someone realizes silence costs more than speaking, until one move, unexpected and sudden, forces everything into the open. And those moments rarely announce themselves in advance. They arrive quietly, unexpectedly, out of sequence, which is why the most dangerous assumption anyone can make at this stage is that nothing is happening. Because the absence of noise is often the clearest sign that something is about to break. As the hours stretched beyond day 18, the most revealing clues weren't coming from new evidence, they were coming from behavior. Behavior always speaks louder than press releases. The way officials adjusted their wording, the way timelines were softened instead of sharpened. Hesitation. Not panic, not confusion, hesitation. Hesitation is what you hear when someone knows the next step is irreversible. When moving forward will force exposure, not just of facts, but of people, careers, relationships, reputations. And that's when investigations slow down on purpose. Because once a case crosses a certain threshold, there's no undo button. Another element that can't be ignored is the controlled pace of disclosure. Information isn't leaking accidentally. It's being released in measured fragments, just enough to keep the public engaged, not enough to reveal direction. That suggests coordination at a level higher than routine policing. It also suggests that investigators are watching reactions as closely as they're watching evidence. Who flinches when certain details are mentioned? Who goes silent? Who suddenly changes their story or stops talking altogether? Those reactions matter. In complex cases, arrests don't always come when evidence is strongest. They come when movement is most dangerous, when waiting becomes riskier than acting, when someone is about to run, destroy evidence, or implicate others to save themselves. That's when law enforcement steps in. Another telling moment came with the acknowledgement that traditional DNA methods hadn't delivered immediate results. Instead of forcing a match, investigators chose to escalate to genetic genealogy. That decision signals patience, but also long-term certainty. They believe the answer exists. They just believe it lives outside the obvious circle. Genetic genealogy doesn't just identify suspects. It maps family trees. It reveals connections people didn't even know existed or hoped would stay hidden. And once that process starts, it doesn't stop quietly. It ripples. People who thought they were unrelated suddenly become relevant. Old histories resurface. Private choices collide with public consequence. That's why IGG isn't used lightly. It changes the shape of a case. At the same time, the silence from federal agencies continued. No confirmations, no denials, just refusal to engage publicly. That kind of silence doesn't mean absence. It means alignment hasn't yet been finalized. Federal involvement often exists in the background long before it's acknowledged. When it finally becomes visible, it's usually because the groundwork is already done. And that brings us back to the most uncomfortable question of all. What if this case isn't stalled, but staged. Not staged as in fabricated, but staged in the sense of controlled sequencing, waiting for the right moment, the right alignment of evidence, timing, and pressure. Because when you move too early, you lose leverage. When you move too late, you lose trust. Somewhere between those 2 points is where this case now sits. Another detail worth noting is how quickly public speculation is being corrected or redirected. Certain theories are allowed to circulate briefly before being subtly shut down. Others are never addressed at all. That selectiveness isn't random, it's strategic. You don't correct what doesn't matter, you correct what's close. And that suggests something else entirely, that the margin for error has narrowed. As for the individuals at the center of this story, one thing is becoming increasingly clear. Whoever is responsible did not act alone. Even if one person carried out the physical act, there were layers of support, intentional or passive, that made it possible. Silence can be participation, inaction can be consent, and knowledge, even without action, can become complicity. Those realities are uncomfortable, which is why they're often resisted until evidence leaves no room to escape them. Another shift is happening too, subtle, but important. The narrative is moving away from where and inching closer to who. Location matters early in a case. Identity matters later. The moment investigators stop talking about places and start talking about processes, psychology, and networks is the moment you know they're building something larger than a single arrest. And that's exactly what this feels like. There's also the matter of confidence. Whoever is involved hasn't made the kind of desperate mistakes you'd expect from someone acting alone or impulsively. That suggests either prior experience or the belief that they are protected. Protection doesn't always mean power. Sometimes it means obscurity. People often assume criminals hide by standing out. In reality, the most effective hiding strategy is blending into normalcy, routine, respectability, predictability. The longer this case goes without a dramatic public breakthrough, the more likely it is that the breakthrough will be quiet and sudden. A sealed warrant, a late-night arrest, a court filing that appears without warning. That's how controlled cases end. Not with sirens and speeches, but with paperwork. And when that paperwork arrives, it tends to answer questions retroactively. Statements that once felt contradictory suddenly make sense. Delays become intentional. Silence becomes necessary. Until then, what we're witnessing is not stagnation, but compression. Pressure building inward. Which brings us to the final and perhaps most sobering thought. Justice doesn't always move at the speed of outrage. It moves at the speed of certainty. And certainty takes time. Every case reaches a moment where the truth is known by a few before it's known by everyone. Day 18 feels like that moment. Not the end, not even the beginning of the end, but the point where the outcome is already decided and the world just hasn't caught up yet. And when it does, the story won't feel confusing anymore. It will feel inevitable. If you want to stay ahead of cases like this, before the headlines catch up, like this video so it reaches more people. Subscribe for long-form, detail-driven true crime analysis that cuts through noise. And share this with someone who understands that silence doesn't mean nothing is happening. Now tell me in the comments, do you think this case is being delayed or deliberately contained until the right moment?